And this joining us is James Woodhousen, Professor of Forecasting and Innovation at London South Bank University. James, a very warm welcome to you. China is discovering that actually trying to put the demographic genie back into the bottle is incredibly difficult. They had the one-child policy, they've rescinded that, but they're discovering that that encouraging people, bribing them, you could say even, to have more children, family expansion is proving enormously difficult. Why?
Well, I think people don't like to have their family life and their family numbers put under duress. And I think the attempts to improve the situation in China by having more children are just as misguided as the earlier directive to have just one. I think we are tired of, and I'm sure the Chinese people are tired of governments imposing just exactly how many children people can have. I think that's quite wrong and won't solve the problem.
But they do have problems when you get the welfare pyramid inverted, when you have far too many old people being supported by far too few workers, taxpayers, etc. And it's not just a Chinese problem, is it? If you think Japan, it's even worse, for instance, where the fertility rate is incredibly low. And these are countries which, unlike, for instance, parts of the West, there is a cultural refusal to acknowledge the possibility of immigration.
Well, I think this is a great mistake, the way it's being apprehended, if I may. It's noticeable in the countries you mentioned, China, Japan. Most often we talk about them in a way that flatters their technological achievements. But as soon as we talk about old people, technology, robots, information technology, chips go out the window, and it simply becomes what a terrible burden they are on society and how there are not enough young people to support them. Whatever happened to technology and the productivity of labour in all of this? It's a very reductionist account just to look at the population divided up into different age groups and say how one is responsible for the plight of another. That's a very frequent pattern in the West. And we can also see it in some ways by the way in which the Chinese Communist Party does apprehend old people in China as a growing weight upon the economy. And that's a mistake. You know, human beings, including older people, are capable of great ingenuity in rescuing the Chinese economy and any other from a downturn. To blame all the problems on older people is a great error.
No, but this isn't about sort of stoking the fires of intergenerational conflict. I mean, it's about, there is data, isn't there? There is data, actually, that shows you when the median age of, the median Chinese, if I can put it that way, gets older and older and older, the risk-taking, appetite for risk-taking and some of the creative entrepreneurial skills that go with youth do start to fade.
Well, I think that's, just flattering the youth, really. I mean, it's just not right to suggest that we become more conservative and less risk-taking as we get older. I mean, if you notice the British election results, old people were castigated for being just unwilling to take a risk. So often that happens in British society, and yet they took a risk in voting for Brexit and, going off a cliff edge, as many people like to say. So I think if you look at the Chinese case, older people there are just as entrepreneurial. They're running some of the great corporations there in their 60s and 70s, just as older people are doing that in America and the West. So I think it's quite wrong to sort of praise youth for their dynamism.
No, but I have written a book about this, so I do know whereof I speak. I mean, it is undeniably true, the data confirms it, that, for instance, in some countries where the median age is very low, there is an appetite for things like revolutionary behaviour. You could look at the Arab Spring and see evidence there that when you've got a very youthful population, they tend to want to rock the boat a little bit. Let's just leave that to one side. I mean, on the demographic questions here, when you look around the world and you see countries like Hungary, Singapore, moving might and main to try and boost their birth rates. I mean, for instance, in Hungary right now, if you have more than 4 children, you will pay no income tax whatsoever. They spend 4 times more on pro-natalist measures than they do on their defence budget. There are things going on out there in the world. Countries are realising that demography poses them problems.
Well, most people don't like Hungary's regime, and
the ones who voted for it do, which is why they're in power.
Finish, please. Most people guffaw as well to be reminded of how de Gaulle used to give medals for motherhood in France. All of these things, suggest that the problems we face are not political and not economic. They're just to do with the birth rate, the death rate, and all of those things which we can't easily control. Nevertheless, governments make the attempt to control them. They will not be successful. The Hungarian government, in favouring new births, will not be successful in that. And, it's a mistake. People need their liberty and the liberty to have as many or as few children as they like. That's fundamental to democracy. And the Hungarian regime makes a big mistake through its natalist policies, just as misguided as people are to blame old people for all of Britain's ills. It all began with David Willetts and his book, The Pinch, and now it's taken up enthusiastically by Extinction Rebellion, The Guardian, The Woke, the idea that older people are inherently conservative and useless, and why don't they all die off? I must remind you that it was Churchill who said, I can't remember the exact phrase, that if you weren't a conservative by the time you were old, you were no good. And, this is very glib and wrong. Some of the greatest scientific contributions that are being made today are by people in their 60s and 70s. So we really have to rid ourselves of this stigma that we like to attach all too easily in a Hollywood youth indulgent culture, the stigma that we attach to older people in China and anywhere else.
Yeah, I was certainly the last person to attach any stigma to the old in that sense, but it's undeniably true, isn't it, that, say, in Japan, you have an industry now that's arisen ostensibly for the disposal of the bodies of old people who've died alone in their apartments. I mean, that is a function of demography.
Yeah, but it's also a function of the fact that, the Japanese welfare system isn't what it could be. The Japanese have talked a lot of talk about robots to help old people and look after themselves, not get into that kind of condition. But, the action is much, much smaller than the talk. So I want to see a much bigger discussion, not of older people as a problem, but how we can use their skills, how we can help them really contribute to society, and to foster more intergenerational dialogue between older people and younger people. That's very important. And one of the merits of the scheme that was talked about by your correspondent, Tom Cheshire in Hangzhou, is it does bring young people and old people together. That's something we need in England just as much as they need it in China.
James Woodhousen is Professor of Forecasting at London South Bank University. James, appreciate your time. Enjoyed that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.